to the White House next year, particularly given sort of the friction and the relationship between President Obama and President Duterte?
Justice, I think you are referencing, we have expressed concerns with a lot of the inflammatory rhetoric from President Duterte recently, and I believe just last night President Duterte delivered remarks which could be seen as taunting additional extrajudicial killings. So that's something that's inconsistent with the values that we try and promote around the world, values that include basic human rights. Obviously, the Philippines is a country that has a long tradition of vibrant civil society, and together on maritime cooperation. We have rich people-to-people ties, and our trade between the two countries is robust. So obviously it's going to be up to the next president-elect to decide which foreign leaders he meets with. So we're going to leave it to him to make those decisions. But obviously it carries a certain amount of weight when the president travels abroad to visit his counterparts around the world. And similarly, it carries weight to invite a foreign leader to the White House.
The president declined to meet with President Duterte on a recent. The president-elect setting this meeting for next year or for whenever.
Jeff, again, it's going to be up to the next president to decide which foreign leaders he meets with in which sequence. Again, it carries a lot of significance when the president of the United States decides to travel to a foreign country and meet with a head of state or one of his counterparts. So those decisions are made with an understanding of the complexities of bilateral relationships and regional relationships around the world. So those decisions are not made lightly here, but similarly, decisions to invite a foreign leader to the White House, the United States, aren't made lightly either. So those will be decisions the president-elect will have to make. So we're not going to cast judgment on those.
There are some recounts going on, as you know, in 3 states. Supporters of President-elect Trump have started some legal challenges to prevent those recounts from continuing. What's the White House's position on whether those should continue?
I saw that, and I think that because of those challenges, this is now subject to ongoing litigation, so I'm going to be under some constraints about how much I can offer. I can tell you that, here at the White House, we're focused on our institutional responsibilities to provide for a seamless transition of power. The President set the tone for that transition just 36 hours after the polls closed when he welcomed the President-elect to the Oval Office. So we are focused on that. Obviously, the state officials in Michigan will have to focus on this recount question, and we expect that question to be resolved there.
And finally, with just too much time left before the president leaves office, can you shed any light on what his plans are after January 20th? Has he gotten a book deal put together? Does he have any teaching gigs lined up? What's the outlook?
Sure. I think the first order a lot of those plans are still getting worked out. As you know, there will be a foundation that is stood up that continues a lot of the work of his public service. If you take it from a higher altitude, if you look at the values that he's championed and the work that he's tried to do as president, but also just as a public servant and as a leader in this country. So I think that the foundation will be a place where a lot of those goals continue to be worked on. So I don't have a whole lot of details right now to announce, but I suspect in the coming weeks and months you'll hear more about their mission and how they plan to fulfill it. Thanks. Joe.
Eric, is there anything more on the letter from Senator Wyden and 6 other Democrats? It essentially says additional information about Russia's attempts to interfere with the United States election are being kept secret. Is the president going to do what his fellow Democrats want him to do?
Joe, we addressed this a little bit yesterday. We received that letter. We acknowledged receipt of that letter. I don't have any update on the response. As you do know, it's been several weeks now, maybe over a month, where the United States government's intelligence community did announce that it had determined an intent by Russian officials, senior Russian officials, to try and interfere in our elections. That was an announcement that was made by the intelligence community in conjunction with the FBI and law enforcement. That was an announcement that was released publicly at the time. So if Democrats on the Hill are looking for more information along those lines, the process of seeing if we can declassify more information along those lines will follow a similar process and a similar track to when the IC originally decided to make that determination public.
But is that process fast? Is it slow? Is it something could be done before January 28th?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure. I know that we just got the letter yesterday, so I'm sure that the right folks here and at the appropriate agencies are taking a look. So if we have a response to that, we'll make sure we get it to you, but we just got it yesterday.
I think probably the 30,000-foot view for the American public is the question of whether the election was actually affected by Russia's attempts. Can you give us anything on that?
Well, what I can give you is two things. One, like I mentioned, the intelligence community determined, I think, middle of October, I think this was when this determination was released, that Russian officials were trying to interfere with our election. We also know that from our Department of Homeland Security and our collaboration with states that we did not notice any increased intrusions or malicious cyber activity on election day. So in terms of the actual cybersecurity and the actual sort of integrity of those systems where votes are cast and counted, we did not notice any increased malicious cyber activity on November the 8th.
Another area, what is the administration's position on the idea of military personnel being appointed to head DOD within 7 years after leaving military active duty? It apparently can come up with the person the president-elect has said he might nominate.
Right. I was going to say, you're just randomly asking our position on this? Yeah. Look, the President Obama has been clear that Donald Trump won the election, and he's going to have the latitude and space he needs to appoint the people that he thinks are fit to lead this country, and that includes members of his cabinet. General Mattis is someone who served our nation with distinction. He was commander of U.S. Central Command from 2010 to 2013, so about 3 years that overlapped with President Obama serving as commander-in-chief. The President is grateful for his leadership and his counsel. And so the question of whether a recently retired military officer should serve as the defense secretary is one that the next administration and the next Congress is going to have to address.
Is it a policy issue that this administration ever considered when proposing a possible DOD secretary? Did somebody get knocked out because of this law?
Yeah, it's actually not a policy, right, or a custom. It is a law. It's in the statute, and it's important to keep in mind that the Defense Department is the single largest institution in the world. 3 million Americans report to the Defense Secretary. U.S. military and civilian personnel are stationed in over 100 countries around the world. They have a budget of nearly $600 billion. Recent defense secretaries include scientists, business leaders, CIA director, congressmen, senators. So some have had military experience, some haven't. But again, we're not going to be in a position to cast judgment on the president-elect's team. The specific question about this waiver will be determined by the next Congress and the next administration. Thanks. Mark.
Eric, back to cybersecurity. I guess the President's Commission is going to be issuing its report later today. Do you know if the recommendations that are contained in that, is the President going to embrace some of these right away? Is he going to be acting on them? Is there time to act on them in the remaining weeks of the administration?
It's a great question, Mark. And yes, the President will be meeting with the Commission's chair, Tom Donilon, later this afternoon. I think the two will discuss in the Oval Office how we as a country can build on both the Commission's work to enhance our cybersecurity over the coming years and take a look at what's been working and what needs more improvement. Since you've studied this, you know that in February of this year, the President directed the creation of a nonpartisan commission and charged it with assessing the current state of cybersecurity in our country and recommending bold, actionable steps that the government, private sector, and the nation as a whole can take to bolster cybersecurity in today's digital world. So I don't want to preview their report for you or our response. I can commit to you that we will make sure that that report is public. We'll also make sure that our response on that report is public, so you guys have a chance to judge for yourselves. But look, the president has made clear that cybersecurity is one of the greatest challenges we face as a nation. That's why this administration has consistently made cybersecurity a top national security and economic security priority, and that's reflected most recently in the fiscal year 2017 budget, which called for a 37% increase in cybersecurity resources. One would think that Congress would act on that budget request. It hasn't to date. So hopefully a lot of the rhetoric we hear from Congress about wanting to make sure our cybersecurity is improved can be translated into some action.
Is there other things that the president's going to be able to do over the next, numbers of weeks?
I don't want to get ahead of what's in the report. I think we'll be able to get that out to you later this afternoon. But this isn't something the president plans to take his eye off the ball on. So if there are actionable pieces in that report, recommendations that we can do over the next 50 or so days, I wouldn't rule out the president acting on those. But I also think that this problem isn't going to get solved in the next 50 days. It's not a challenge that is stagnant. It's a challenge that that morphs and turns, given the way technology is developed these days. So I think this is absolutely going to have to be a challenge that the next president takes on, as well as the next Congress.
Is there any coverage that we're going to get on?
I think it's going to be a closed private meeting in the Oval Office.
What time?
Thanks. I don't have the time, but later this afternoon. Thanks. Kevin.
I want to ask you a couple of questions. Most notably, I want to get your take on this refugee story that you may have heard about. Australia apparently is turning back a number of refugees that were set to be headed to the island, and now there is reporting that they'll be making their way here to the United States. There's been some concern on the Hill as well about the usefulness of this particular approach, to say nothing of the vetting process. Can you give me an update on why the administration feels like this is a good example of opening our doors, if you will, to refugees who are in need of a place to go?
Sure. I appreciate the question, because the United States is proud of its long history as the largest refugee resettlement country in the world. As the president has said, our refugee resettlement program has grown considerably in the last year. That's under the president's direction. He feels it's an American value to take care of some of the world's most vulnerable populations. And the U.S., as you're referencing, has agreed to consider resettlement from the United Nations High Commission for refugees now living in Nauru and Papua New Guinea. We engage all countries to find durable solutions for refugees. The president believes that it's important that we do that. But to your question about screening and security, the president also believes that his chief priority is to keep the American people safe. That's why the screening for refugees is the highest level of scrutiny anyone coming into the United States is subjected to. So that includes security checks with the Department of Homeland Security, the National Counterterrorism Center, the FBI, multiple intelligence agencies. The safety and security of the American people is our top priority, but the president believes that doesn't distract people while also providing refuge to the world's most vulnerable populations.
But I think there are a number of people, Eric, who would wonder if, given the president-elect's posture
Well, I can't speak to the tone and tenor of the way things are going on the Hill right now. All I can say is one of the principles that we have that we believe in and adhere to, and as does the president-elect, is that we have one president at a time. So this was a decision, an announcement that I believe was made either in late October or early November. So we have one president at a time. The commander-in-chief, this president, sets the policies. The president-elect, Donald Trump, will set the policies once he takes the oath of office. But in terms of the screening, I want to assure you that, again, this is a population that is subject to the highest level of scrutiny of anyone trying to enter this country. We work closely under the President's direction with our Department of Homeland Security, our intelligence community, and other relevant agencies to increase capacity to conduct security screening over the past year. DHS has deployed additional officers to interview applicants. They conduct exhaustive screenings. And I should also add that the burden is on the refugee to show evidence that he or she will not be a threat. So we don't just take anyone's word for it, and it's not the absence of evidence that allows us to approve someone. A refugee has to proactively show that they will be safe here in the United States.
Can you tell me if the President had an occasion to speak with French President Hollande since his announcement yesterday? And if so, can you give me sort of a readout of what that conversation was like, and if there are any concerns that the sort of growing populism that we're seeing has percolated in places like the UK and perhaps you could argue here in the US is now spreading to France?
Kevin, I don't believe the President has had a chance to phone President Hollande in the past day. I know that they were able to catch up in Berlin a few weeks ago. I know that you were on that trip as well. And look, generally speaking, everyone here at the White House appreciates President Hollande's service as the President of France. All terrorist groups. Under President Hollande's leadership, France hosted the COP21 conference on climate. This brought together nearly 200 countries to be the first ever deal of its size and scope to help combat climate change. So President Hollande has been a trusted partner and friend to the American people. Wouldn't be surprised if President Obama has a conversation with President Hollande in the coming weeks, but I don't have anything to read out to you now.
And last, as is my occasion, can you give me an update on the comings and goings over at Gitmo, where we are right now? Do you have any transfers to announce? I know the President has made it clear that he would like to close it. That's not likely to happen, obviously, but he certainly is doing his best to empty it along the way. Where are we on that?
Kevin, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but we can get you those. You are right that the President has established this as a priority to close the facility at Guantanamo Bay. One of the stumbling blocks, well, the principal stumbling blocks to this has been the United States Congress. And in fact, the National Defense Author said that this facility should be closed. So we share that goal. We wish that more members of Congress did as well. Thank you, Kevin.